I feel that the look of silence and the act of killing, Francesco, are two parts of a greater whole. I hope very much that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I have not yet succeeded in finding a title for the two movies together as one title. I do think you can see the act of killing, and especially the unabridged director's cut of the act of killing, which I think I sent to you. I think you can see that on its own. I think you can see the look of silence on its own, but I think very much the two together form something of a greater meaning. The two are exploring complementary aspects of the legacy of mass violence and impunity, and how the ways that individually, collectively, psychologically, we cope with mass violence, self-deception, lying to ourselves, affect the whole society. What are the consequences of how we as human beings, and particularly perpetrators, cope with mass violence? I think that Anwar, in the act of killing, I think what we see is, I think we do see, first of all, the acute shallowness that Hannah Arendt defined as the fundamental precondition for the banality of evil. I think we also see that evil, the human capacity for evil, depends entirely on our ability to lie to ourselves, self-deception. I think that we see a kind of, but I think that we go beyond that. And when Anwar starts to open up about his despair, we see a kind of ecstatic despair that in the last act of the film leads Anwar to throw himself into the worst aspects of who he is. And I don't think that we, so I think we see actually something very complicated. I think we see the way that guilt and a moral and human morality actually can lead to despair, which can lead to further evil. I think that we see in numerous scenes Anwar blaming his victims, because it's as though that the guilt makes Anwar feel like killing has destroyed him. And who does he blame? Who does he get angry at? He gets angry at the victims themselves, because by killing them, it's destroyed him. And he throws himself despairingly, ecstatically into more further evil. So there's this sense somehow that human morality, evil and morality are not to be opposed to each other. Actually, the fact that we're moral beings is part of the mechanism by which we commit evil. And that's something very painful that the film, particularly the uncut version of the film, really explores. So I met Adi actually long before I met Anwar. In 2003, when I first returned to Indonesia to work on, to make a film about why those plantation workers were so afraid, I discovered that there was one victim whose name was virtually synonymous with the entire genocide across that region. And that was Ramli. And that's because Ramli's murder, unlike the tens of thousands of other people who were killed in that region, Ramli's murder had witnesses. And so to speak about Ramli for the survivors was to insist that these events, which had traumatized everybody, but which the government had threatened everybody into pretending had never occurred, it was to insist that these events had taken place. It was like pinching yourself to remind yourself that you're really awake. It was an act of resistance to talk about Ramli. It was a clinging to sanity, saying, I'm not insane for feeling traumatized. There's a reason for this trauma. So it was inevitable that I would be introduced to Ramli's family. In fact, Ramli was famous for miles and miles around, but his body was buried on that plantation where we made the globalization tapes. And very quickly I was introduced to Ramli's mother, who I fell in love with instantly, his father, who was still healthy at the time, and Ramli's youngest brother, who was born after the killings and was different from the rest of the family for precisely that reason. He wasn't traumatized in the same way as everybody else. He wasn't afraid in the same way. And he was And yet he was desperate to understand what had happened to his family to make him them so afraid. You see, his parents were so afraid that they'd never even told him what had happened. They didn't want him to go to school and talk about it and get him into trouble. His mother would talk again and again about the last night of Romley and insist you are Romley's replacement, but wouldn't tell him the bigger story of what had happened. And so he was trying to understand what happened to his family, what happened to his society, what happened to his village. And he found in my filmmaking process the means of understanding that. He was an optometrist. As I mentioned earlier, he encouraged me to film the perpetrators when the army threatened the survivors not to participate. Then he saw that footage and encouraged me to keep filming the perpetrators. And he would watch everything I had time to show him for the next 7 or 8 years, from 2003 to 2010. While I was filming with the perpetrators, and he was gradually transformed by it. I mean, midway through the shooting of The Act of Killing, I found out that maybe in 2007 or 8, I found out that he was now testing the eyes, specifically seeking out older people so that he could ask them what they remembered of 1965. He hadn't done that before. That was as a result of watching the footage I was shooting with the perpetrators. Then I gave him a camera in 2009 so that he could document, so that he could search for visual metaphors that would be inspiring or helpful for our thinking about what we would do with the look of silence. And he filmed quite a number of things, and only one of them is in the look of silence. It's one scene that he shot which is in the look of silence. It's the scene where it's the scene where his father is crawling on the floor lost at the end of the film. That turns out to be the only image that Adi shot that had made it into the look of silence. And when I returned in 2012 to shoot the look of silence with Adi, he said to me, I said, I didn't know he would be the main character, but I knew it would be a journey we would take together. And I said to him, Adi, how should we begin this film? And he said, I need to meet the perpetrators now, the ones who did this to my brother. And I said, no, it's too dangerous. It's never happened in Indonesia that a survivor has gone to a perpetrator and confronted them because the perpetrators are still in power. And it's never happened in documentary cinema, ever, that survivors confront perpetrators while the perpetrators are still in power, when there's no truth and reconciliation process, when there's no justice. And Adi said, Joshua, there's one image I shot with the camera that you gave me that I've never showed you. And he got out the camera and he got out the one tape that he never gave me, and trembling, crying, played me the scene of his father lost in the house. And I said, and he said, don't you see what this means? And I said, no, what's happening here, Adi? Why is your father so confused, and why are you not helping him? And he said, well, this was the first day my father didn't remember anyone in the family, and all day we were trying to comfort him. The whole family was together for the Eid holiday at the end of Ramadan. My father couldn't recognize any of us. And all day I was trying to comfort him, and he couldn't be comforted, and would just get more and more upset. And I thought the most loving thing I can do at some point is to bear witness. And I filmed this. And I said, well, what does it mean to you? And he said, well, I felt, and he's crying while he's telling me this, my father's trapped in a prison of fear. And he'll never get out of it because he can't remember the killings that caused it. He'll never be able to work through his fear because he can't even remember the source of his trauma. It's too late. He will die in this prison of fear, and I do not want my children to inherit this fear. And so I am going, and I think if I meet the perpetrators, they will recognize that I'm a kind man, a gentle man. They'll apologize to me, and they won't feel threatened by me. They'll apologize to me, and then I will be able to forgive them. And then we'll start to be able to live together as human beings instead of as perpetrators and victims afraid of each other. And I thought there's no way that the perpetrators will apologize to him so easily. They'll be angry, they'll threaten him. But I also knew that Adi was proposing to create an example of what dialogue between perpetrator and victim could look like. He was proposing, in that sense, through that example, to break 50 years of silence. And I thought, even if he fails in the scenes, if we shoot this, if we film this, he will succeed through the film. And just by showing the tension and just by therefore that divides people, the fear, and just by showing the silence, and just by showing how necessary this dialogue is, how long overdue it is. And I realized that if we could shoot this, then if we could film this, that safely, then it was worth doing. And I realized because we had edited the act of killing but not yet released it, all of the commanders of the men who all of the men Adi wanted to meet thought that I was close to their commanders, because their commanders appear in the act of killing, and the production of the act of killing was famous across that region of Indonesia. And because they hadn't seen it yet, they thought we were friends. And for that reason, I realized this very unusual situation we were in allowed us to do something completely unprecedented, which was for Adi to meet these men. And we then took all sorts of other practical steps to make it as safe as possible, and filmed those 6 very, very important confrontations that we see in The Look of Silence.